The static crackled through Major Evelyn Nightingale Reeves' headset as she banked her MH-60 Black Hawk low over the Syrian desert. The coordinates didn't match. 3 times she'd verified them. 3 times the numbers led to empty sand. But the medical evacuation request had come through official channels, authenticated with proper encryption keys. A wounded army nurse, call sign Stitch, requesting immediate extraction from a forward operating base that, according to every map in existence, had never been built. Control, this is Nightingale 1. I'm seeing nothing but sand dunes at the designated coordinates. Request clarification. Her voice remained steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. 22 years of military service had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. Nightingale 1 control, coordinates confirmed. Continue search pattern. Stitch is priority alpha medical emergency. The dispatcher's voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. Priority alpha meant someone was dying. It meant she couldn't leave without them. Through her night vision goggles, the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Her co-pilot, Captain Rodriguez, adjusted the thermal imaging display, sweeping the terrain below. "Ma'am, I'm not picking up any heat signatures. No structures, no vehicles, no personnel." Evelyn's gloved fingers tightened on the collective. The fuel gauge showed 40 minutes of flight time remaining, enough to make one more sweep before they'd have to return to base. But those coordinates, they were burned into her memory now. 34 degrees 1745 N, 40 degrees 5218 E. She'd flown over this exact spot 6 months ago during a routine reconnaissance mission. Nothing but ancient ruins and scattered rocks. Nightingale 1, this is Stitch. The voice that crackled through her headset was weak, strained with pain. "I can hear your rotors. I'm directly below you, please. I don't have much time." Rodriguez met her eyes, confusion evident even behind his night vision equipment. The thermal imaging showed nothing. No human heat signature, no shelter, no signs of life. Yet the transmission was coming from directly beneath their aircraft. "Stitch, this is Nightingale 1. I need you to pop smoke or activate a strobe. We cannot visual you." Evelyn's training kicked in, overriding the growing sense of unease. "Find the patient. Complete the mission. Ask questions later." "Negative on smoke, Nightingale. My position is compromised. I'm transmitting GPS coordinates to your navigation system now." The woman's voice grew weaker. "Please hurry. They're coming back." The GPS system chimed softly as new coordinates populated the display. The exact same numbers. But this time, as Evelyn descended to 100 feet above the desert floor, she saw it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding sand, perfectly rectangular, too perfect to be natural. The thermal imaging remained blank, but through her naked eyes, she could see the outline of what looked like a concealed entrance. The kind of camouflage that cost millions of dollars and required months of specialized engineering to install. "Control, this is Nightingale 1. I have visual on a possible underground structure at designated coordinates, requesting immediate backup and ground support." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had just stumbled onto something far beyond a simple medical evacuation. The radio fell silent for nearly 30 seconds. When Control finally responded, the voice was different. Harder, more senior. "Nightingale 1, you are ordered to extract the wounded personnel and return to base immediately. No further communication regarding this mission until debriefing." Rodriguez's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. After 15 years as her co-pilot, he'd learned to read the subtle changes in her posture, the way her breathing shifted when a situation turned dangerous. "Ma'am, something's not right about this." "Stitch, this is Nightingale 1. I'm going to need you to guide me to your exact position. My thermal imaging isn't picking up your heat signature." Evelyn ignored Control's transmission, focusing entirely on the wounded soldier below. I'm in a concrete room about 30 feet underground. There's a camouflaged hatch about 20 meters north of your current position. But Nightingale, the woman's voice cracked. You need to know I'm not just a nurse. I'm Captain Amanda Castellano's Army Intelligence, and what I found down here, it changes everything. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Army intelligence operating in Syria without her knowledge. Underground facilities that didn't exist on any map. Medical evacuations that led to classified installations. She'd been a pilot long enough to recognize a black operation when she saw one. Captain Castellanos, this is Major Reeves. I'm coming down to get you. Rodriguez, prep the winch system and keep the engines hot. We may need to leave quickly. Ma'am, I've got movement on the horizon. 3 vehicles approaching from the east. They're not broadcasting friendly identification. Rodriguez's voice was tight with concern. Through her binoculars, Evelyn could see the dust clouds kicked up by the approaching vehicles. They moved with the purposeful speed of a military convoy, but something about their formation was wrong. 2 spread out for a standard patrol, 2 coordinated for insurgents. Stitch, we have company coming. I need you to pop that hatch and get to the surface now. Negative, Nightingale. The hatch is sealed from the outside. I've been trying to open it for 6 hours. That's why I called for extraction. The woman's voice carried a note of desperation that made Evelyn's blood run cold. 6 hours. Captain Castellanos had been trapped underground for 6 hours, and no one had reported her missing. No search and rescue operation had been launched. The medical evacuation request had come through unofficial channels, bypassing normal command structure. Rodriguez, get on the radio. I want to know everything about Captain Amanda Castellanos. Service record, current assignment, chain of command. And I want to know who authorized this extraction. Evelyn's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades navigating military bureaucracy. Ma'am, I'm showing 3 Black Hawks approaching from the west. They're not responding to radio calls. Rodriguez's hands moved efficiently across his controls, preparing defensive countermeasures. The approaching helicopters flew in perfect formation, their silhouettes barely visible against the starlit sky. Evelyn's trained eye recognized the flight pattern immediately. Special operations. The kind of unit that operated outside normal command structure, answering only to Pentagon officials whose names never appeared in public records. Stitch, I need you to tell me exactly what you found down there, right now. Nightingale, I found evidence of a weapons program, chemical agents, prototype delivery systems, and I found American equipment, components that were supposed to be destroyed years ago. The woman's voice broke completely. Someone has been selling our own weapons to insurgent groups. The serial numbers match equipment that was officially destroyed in Iraq. The pieces clicked together in Evelyn's mind with terrifying clarity. An intelligence officer discovers evidence of treason. She's trapped in an underground facility, calling for extraction through unofficial channels. 3 unidentified helicopters approaching her position, vehicles on the ground that weren't broadcasting friendly identification. Rodriguez, we're not conducting a medical evacuation. We're conducting a rescue operation, and I have a feeling we're about to become targets ourselves. The lead helicopter in the approaching formation suddenly accelerated, breaking away from the group and heading directly toward their position. No radio contact, no identification, no warning. Just the steady whump-whump-whump of rotor blades cutting through the night air. Ma'am, they're painting us with targeting radar. Rodriguez's voice was calm, professional, but Evelyn could hear the underlying tension. 22 years of military service, hundreds of combat missions, decorations for valor that filled an entire wall of her office. But Evelyn had never found herself in a situation quite like this. An American intelligence officer trapped underground, evidence of treason, unidentified aircraft approaching with hostile intent. Stitch, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Are you really Army intelligence or are you something else? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I'm NSA, National Security Agency. I was investigating reports of missing weapons shipments when I found this facility. Nightingale, the people who built this place, they're not insurgents. They're Americans, and they know I'm here. The radio crackled with interference as the approaching helicopters switched to electronic warfare mode, attempting to jam their communications. But Evelyn's aircraft was equipped with the latest countermeasures, gifts from a Pentagon that had learned to trust her judgment over the years. Rodriguez prepped the minigun. We're going to need to fight our way out of here. Ma'am, orders are to avoid engagement with unidentified aircraft unless directly threatened. Rodriguez's by-the-book response was exactly what she'd expected. Captain, those aircraft are approaching a rescue operation with targeting radar active and communications jamming engaged. I'd say we're already being directly threatened. Evelyn's voice carried the weight of command authority earned through decades of combat experience. The lead helicopter was now close enough that she could see the pilot's helmet through the cockpit glass. No unit markings, no identification numbers, no national insignia. A ghost aircraft flown by ghost pilots, operating outside the boundaries of law and military protocol. Stitch, I'm going to need you to move to the northeast corner of your facility. There should be an emergency exit shaft. It's going to be a tight fit, but it's your only way out. How do you know about the emergency exit? The woman's voice was sharp with suspicion. Because I helped design these facilities 20 years ago. Back when I was a young captain working classified construction projects in Iraq. The emergency shaft is always in the northeast corner, always leads to a concealed surface hatch about 50 meters from the main entrance. The admission hung in the air between them. Evelyn had just revealed classified information to someone she'd never met, someone who claimed to be NSA but might be something else entirely. But the approaching helicopters and the targeting radar convinced her that normal protocols had already been abandoned. Nightingale, I found the shaft. It's partially collapsed, but I think I can squeeze through. Give me 5 minutes. You have 3. Rodriguez, bring us around to the northeast quadrant. I want to be directly over that exit shaft when she surfaces. The Black Hawk banked sharply, its engine straining against the sudden change in direction. Through her night vision goggles, Evelyn could see the lead pursuing helicopter adjusting its course to intercept. The pilot was skilled, experienced, flying with the kind of precision that came from years of special operations training. Ma'am, I'm reading 4 heat signatures in the lead aircraft. Fully armed combat team. Rodriguez's voice was clinical, professional, but his hands were already moving to arm the helicopter's defensive systems. Stitch, status report. I'm in the shaft, moving toward the surface. Nightingale, there's something else you need to know. I found personnel files down there, photos, mission reports, the person running this operation. It's someone from your past. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Her past was filled with classified operations, black projects, missions that officially never happened. But there were only a handful of people who knew about her involvement in the Iraqi facility construction program. What name did you see, Stitch? Colonel Marcus Webb, your former commanding officer. The collective nearly slipped from Evelyn's grasp. Marcus Webb. The man who trained her, promoted her, recommended her for every major assignment in her career. The man who'd been declared killed in action during a classified operation in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Stitch, Colonel Webb is dead. He was killed in a helicopter crash in 2022. Her voice was steady, but her mind was racing through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Nightingale, I'm looking at mission reports dated last month, orders bearing his signature, authorization codes that only he would have access to. Either someone is using his identity or Marcus Webb faked his own death. The pursuing helicopter was now close enough that Evelyn could see the door gunner adjusting his weapon system. A M240 machine gun, the same weapon she'd operated as a crew chief early in her career. The same weapon that could tear through her aircraft's armor like tissue paper. Rodriguez's evasive maneuvers were about to have company. The Black Hawk dove toward the desert floor, using the terrain to break the approaching aircraft's line of sight. But the pilot was skilled, experienced, and he'd anticipated the maneuver. The machine gun opened fire, tracers streaking through the night air just meters above their rotor disc. "Ma'am, we're taking fire from unidentified aircraft. Requesting permission to return fire." "Permission granted. Defend the aircraft." The minigun spun up with a high-pitched whine, sending a stream of tungsten core rounds toward the pursuing helicopter. The other pilot rolled right, avoiding the worst of the gunfire, but Evelyn could see sparks flying from his aircraft's tail boom. "Stitch, I need you on the surface now. We're about to get very busy up here." "I'm at the hatch. It's locked from the outside, but I can see the mechanism. Give me 30 seconds." 30 seconds. In aerial combat, 30 seconds was an eternity. The pursuing helicopter had recovered from Rodriguez's gunfire and was closing for another attack. Behind it, the other two aircraft were spreading out, attempting to surround Evelyn's position. "Control, this is Nightingale 1. I am taking fire from unidentified aircraft while conducting authorized rescue operation. Requesting immediate backup." The radio remained silent. Either Control couldn't hear her transmission, or they were choosing not to respond. Neither possibility was reassuring. "Stitch, status report." "I'm through the hatch. I can see your aircraft. You're about 200 meters south of my position." Through her night vision goggles, Evelyn could see a figure running across the desert floor. Small, quick, moving with the efficient stride of someone trained in combat movement. But the pursuing helicopters had seen her too. Rodriguez, suppressing fire on the lead aircraft. "I'm going down to get our package." "Ma'am, standard protocol is to use the winch system from altitude. Going to ground level makes us vulnerable to ground fire." "Standard protocol assumes we're not being hunted by unidentified aircraft. Take us down." The Black Hawk descended rapidly, its landing gear extending as they approached the desert floor. Through the swirling dust kicked up by their rotors, Evelyn could see the figure more clearly. A woman, early 30s, wearing desert camouflage and carrying a tactical backpack. Captain Amanda Castellanos, NSA operative, the woman who'd stumbled onto evidence of treason. "Stitch, move to the aircraft. We're going to extract under fire." The woman sprinted toward the helicopter, her movements efficient despite an obvious limp. As she approached, Evelyn could see the exhaustion in her face, the strain of 6 hours trapped underground, but also something else. Determination. The kind of absolute focus that came from knowing she was carrying information that could change everything. "Nightingale, I've got the files. Physical documents, computer drives, photographic evidence. Everything needed to expose this operation." The pursuing helicopter opened fire again, this time aiming for the running figure. Rounds sparked off the desert floor just meters behind Captain Castellanos, kicking up clouds of sand and stone fragments. "Rodriguez, return fire, cover our passenger." The minigun spoke again, its rapid-fire bursts forcing the attacking aircraft to break off its approach. But the other two helicopters were closing from different directions, and Evelyn realized they were being systematically surrounded. "Stitch, get in the aircraft. We're leaving now." Captain Castellanos dove through the open door, landing hard on the cargo deck. She was younger than Evelyn had expected, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Major Reeves, I presume. I've heard stories about you." Her voice was stronger now, more confident. "Save the introductions for later. Right now, we need to get out of here alive. Evelyn pulled the collective, lifting off from the desert floor as Rodriguez continued laying down suppressing fire. But as they climbed, she realized the tactical situation had become impossible. 3 hostile aircraft, superior firepower, and no backup coming. The kind of situation that training manuals said to avoid at all costs. Stitch, what exactly did you find down there? And don't give me generalities. I need specifics. I found evidence that Colonel Webb has been selling American weapons to insurgent groups for the past 3 years. Not just small arms, but advanced systems. Anti-aircraft missiles, encrypted communications equipment, even chemical weapons components. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Marcus Webb, the man who'd shaped her career, who'd been like a father to her, was a traitor. Worse than a traitor. He was directly responsible for American deaths. And you have proof. I have bank records, shipping manifests, photographs of weapons transfers, and recorded conversations. Enough evidence to put him in federal prison for the rest of his life, if we can get out of here alive. The pursuing helicopters had regrouped and were approaching from 3 different directions. Classic pincer movement, designed to overwhelm their defensive capabilities. Evelyn's mind raced through tactical options, each one ending in disaster. Rodriguez, how much ammunition do we have left? About 200 rounds for the minigun, maybe 30 seconds of sustained fire. Not enough. Against 3 aircraft with superior firepower, they'd be overwhelmed in minutes. But Evelyn had survived 22 years of military service by thinking beyond conventional tactics. Stitch, those weapons transfers, were they all going to the same groups? No, different organizations, but they all had one thing in common. They were all fighting against American forces. Webb was literally arming our enemies. The lead helicopter opened fire again, this time with rockets. The explosion just meters below their aircraft threw the Black Hawk sideways, alarms screaming as Rodriguez fought to maintain control. "Ma'am, we've lost hydraulics in the tail rotor. We're going to have to auto-rotate." Auto-rotation. The nightmare scenario every helicopter pilot trained for but hoped never to experience. A controlled crash landing using only the aircraft's forward momentum to maintain rotor speed. Survivable, but barely. "Stitch, hold on, we're going down." The Black Hawk descended rapidly toward the desert floor, Rodriguez's skilled hands working the controls to maintain what little control they had left. Through the cockpit glass, Evelyn could see the pursuing helicopters circling like vultures, waiting for them to crash. Nightingale, there's something else. The weapons weren't just being sold. They were being traded, in exchange for intelligence about American operations. Webb was feeding information to insurgent groups about our troop movements, our patrol routes, our planned operations. The aircraft hit the desert floor hard, the landing gear collapsing under the impact. But Rodriguez's skilled flying had turned what should have been a fatal crash into a survivable landing. The rotors wound down with a dying whine as dust settled around the crippled aircraft. "Everyone out, we're about to have company." The 3 helicopters were descending toward their position, door gunners visible in the open doors. Not a rescue operation, an execution squad. "Stitch, how far to the nearest friendly base?" "About 40 kilometers northeast, but we'll never make it on foot, not with them hunting us." Through the settling dust, Evelyn could see figures fast-roping from the circling helicopters. Special operations soldiers, moving with the efficient precision of elite units. But they weren't wearing American uniforms. Private military contractors, the kind of mercenaries who operated outside the law. Rodriguez grabbed the survival gear. "We're going to have to evade and escape." "Ma'am, my ankle's broken. I'm not going anywhere quickly." Captain Castellanos was already moving, checking her weapon and scanning the surrounding terrain. "Major, there's a wadi about 200 meters north. We can use it for cover." Rodriguez, can you walk? I can try, ma'am, but I'm going to slow you down. The decision was instantaneous. Leave a wounded crew member behind, or risk the mission and the intelligence that could expose a massive treason operation. It wasn't really a choice at all. Nobody gets left behind. Stitch, help me get Rodriguez mobile. Together, they hauled the injured pilot to his feet, supporting his weight as they moved away from the crashed helicopter. Behind them, the mercenaries were spreading out, beginning a systematic search of the area. Major, you need to leave me here. Take the intelligence and complete the mission. Not happening, Rodriguez. We all go home or none of us do. The wadi was deeper than it had appeared from the air, cutting through the desert floor like a scar. They slid down the sandy slope, using the depression for cover as the mercenaries approached their abandoned aircraft. Stitch, what's your assessment of our situation? Tactically, we're screwed. 3 aircraft, probably 20 soldiers, desert terrain with no cover. But strategically, we have something they want. The intelligence I gathered. They can't just kill us and walk away. Meaning? Meaning they're going to want to talk first. Find out what we know, what we've transmitted, who else might have copies of the evidence. The words were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. The mercenaries had found their trail and were following it toward the wadi. Professional soldiers, moving with the kind of discipline that came from years of combat experience. Major Reeves, this is Colonel Webb. I know you can hear me. The voice echoed across the desert, amplified by a portable speaker system. Evelyn's blood ran cold. The voice was unmistakably familiar, unchanged despite 3 years of supposed death. Her former commanding officer, the man who'd shaped her career, was very much alive. I have a proposition for you, Major. You and your crew surrender peacefully, and I'll ensure you receive fair treatment. Continue to resist, and things will become significantly more unpleasant. Stitch, how much evidence do you have with you? Everything. Computer drives, documents, photographs. Enough to expose the entire operation and everyone involved. And have you transmitted any of this intelligence? Not yet. I was planning to do that once I reached friendly territory. The situation was becoming clearer. Webb needed them alive, at least temporarily. He needed to know what intelligence had been gathered, what had been transmitted, who else might be involved. That gave them a small advantage. Colonel Webb, this is Major Reeves. I'm willing to discuss terms. Excellent. I'm approaching your position alone and unarmed. Please don't do anything foolish. Ma'am, you're not actually considering surrender, are you? Rodriguez's voice was weak but determined. I'm considering staying alive long enough to complete our mission. The figure that approached the wadi was exactly as Evelyn remembered. Tall, lean, with prematurely gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Colonel Marcus Webb, the man who trained her, promoted her, and apparently betrayed everything they'd both sworn to protect. Hello, Evelyn, you look well. Hello, Marcus, you look alive, which is interesting considering your official status. Webb smiled, the same expression she'd seen 1,000 times during briefings and training exercises. My death was somewhat exaggerated, necessary for operational security. Operational security for what? Selling weapons to insurgents. Selling weapons to maintain balance. Do you have any idea how much damage American military superiority has done to global stability? Sometimes our enemies need to be able to fight back. The words were delivered with the same calm confidence she'd always associated with Webb. But now that confidence sounded like madness. The rationalization of someone who'd convinced himself that treason was patriotism. Marcus, you've been responsible for American deaths. Our soldiers, our allies, our civilians. How do you justify that? I justify it by looking at the bigger picture. A few casualties now prevent a much larger conflict later. Sometimes peace requires bloodshed. Captain Castellanos was listening to the conversation with growing disbelief. Colonel, you're talking about our own people, Americans who trusted you, who followed your orders. Captain Castellanos, I presume, NSA intelligence officer, currently investigating weapons shipments in the Middle East. You've been very thorough in your research. Thorough enough to expose your entire operation. Perhaps, but thoroughness requires survival, and survival requires cooperation. I'm prepared to offer you a choice. Join the operation and you'll be well compensated for your silence. Continue to resist, and you'll simply disappear into the Syrian desert. Evelyn's mind was racing through tactical options. Webb was confident, probably overconfident. He'd survived by staying one step ahead of investigators, by anticipating their moves. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed she was still the young captain who'd followed his orders without question. Marcus, I have a counter-proposal. You surrender to us, and we'll ensure you receive a fair trial. Webb's laughter echoed across the desert. Evelyn, you always were idealistic, but idealism doesn't survive contact with reality. The world is more complicated than the military taught us. The world is exactly as complicated as the military taught us, which is why we have laws, regulations, and codes of conduct, which is why we swear oaths to defend the Constitution, not to decide unilaterally what's best for global stability. The Constitution is a document written by men who never imagined the complexities of modern warfare. Sometimes leadership requires making decisions that go beyond legal frameworks. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching aircraft, but these weren't the unmarked helicopters that had been hunting them. These were clearly military, flying in standard formation, broadcasting proper identification codes. Colonel Webb, this is General Morrison, Joint Special Operations Command. You are ordered to surrender immediately. Webb's confidence faltered for the first time. That's impossible. Morrison doesn't know about this operation. Actually, he does. Because while you were busy explaining your philosophy, Captain Castellanos was transmitting everything to JSOC headquarters. You've been broadcasting your confession to the entire Pentagon. The small device in Castellanos' hand looked like a standard military radio, but Evelyn recognized the sophisticated encryption antenna. Military intelligence had come a long way since her days as a junior officer. You've been recording this entire conversation. Every word, along with detailed GPS coordinates, photographic evidence, and complete intelligence files. Colonel Webb, you're not just exposed, you're finished. The approaching helicopters were clearly military, bearing the markings of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The same unit that had trained Evelyn 20 years ago, the same pilots who'd flown her through countless combat missions. Marcus, it's over. Surrender now, and maybe you can negotiate a plea agreement. But Webb was already moving, his hand reaching for the concealed weapon Evelyn had noticed earlier. The same tactical awareness that had made him an effective commander now made him a dangerous enemy. Nobody moves until I'm safely away from here. The operation is too important to be stopped by bureaucratic interference. Colonel, you're surrounded by American forces. Your mercenaries are outgunned and outnumbered. This is your last chance to surrender peacefully. My mercenaries are professionals. They've been in worse situations than this. Webb's voice carried the same confidence, but Evelyn could see the strain in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed operation was collapsing. The radio crackled with incoming transmissions. Nightingale 1, this is Guardian 6. We have visual on your position. Are you secure? Guardian 6, this is Nightingale 1. We have one wounded, one intelligence asset, and one hostile in custody. Request immediate medical evacuation for my co-pilot. Roger, Nightingale 1. Medical team is inbound. Be advised, we also have 3 aircraft with unidentified personnel attempting to leave the area. Guardian 6, those aircraft are hostile. They've been conducting operations against American forces. Understood, intercept teams are already in position. Through the growing dawn light, Evelyn could see the unmarked helicopters attempting to flee the area. But the 160th had positioned blocking forces at strategic points, and the mercenaries found themselves trapped in the same tactical situation they'd tried to impose on her. Colonel Webb, your people are surrounded. Order them to surrender and maybe some of them will live through this. They know the risks. They accepted them when they signed on to the operation. They accepted them because you lied to them. You told them they were fighting for America, not against it. Webb's hand moved toward his weapon, but Captain Castellanos was faster. Her sidearm was drawn and aimed before he could complete the motion. Colonel, I strongly advise against that course of action. Captain, you're making a mistake. The operation is bigger than you realize. It involves people at the highest levels of government, people who won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their interests. Then it's a good thing we're not doing this alone. The sound of approaching footsteps indicated that the rescue team had arrived. Professional soldiers, moving with the efficient precision of elite units. But these were clearly American forces, wearing proper uniforms and following proper procedures. Major Reeves, I'm Master Sergeant Patterson, 160th SOAR. We're here to extract you and your team. Sergeant, we have 1 wounded requiring immediate medical attention, 1 intelligence asset with critical information, and 1 prisoner requiring maximum security transport. Understood, ma'am. Medical team is treating your co-pilot now. Intelligence debrief team is standing by, and we have special instructions regarding the prisoner. Special instructions. He's to be transported directly to Pentagon custody. No stops, no delays, no communication with outside personnel. Webb's face went pale. Pentagon custody meant he'd be facing charges at the highest levels of military justice, courts-martial for treason, espionage, and conspiracy, the kind of charges that carried life sentences or worse. Evelyn, you don't understand what you're doing. The operation was sanctioned at levels above your clearance. You're going to destroy careers, compromise ongoing operations, maybe even trigger international incidents. Marcus, I understand exactly what I'm doing. I'm following my oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, which apparently includes former commanding officers who have forgotten what that oath means. The medical team was working efficiently on Rodriguez, stabilizing his injuries and preparing him for transport. Captain Castellanos was organizing her intelligence files, preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most important debriefing of her career. Major Reeves, we need to get you out of here. Intelligence indicates there may be additional hostile forces in the area. Sergeant, what's the status of those 3 aircraft? 2 were forced down and their personnel taken into custody. The 3rd aircraft crashed during the intercept. No survivors. The personnel from the downed aircraft. Mercenaries, ma'am. Mixed nationalities, but all carrying forged identification. They're being transported to a secure facility for interrogation. The pieces were finally falling into place. Webb's operation had been larger than anyone had realized, involving not just weapons sales but international mercenary networks, the kind of conspiracy that could destabilize entire regions. Stitch, how long have you been investigating this? About 6 months. Started as a routine audit of missing weapons shipments, but every lead I followed pointed to the same conclusion. Someone with high-level access was systematically selling American weapons to hostile groups. And you tracked it back to Webb. I tracked it back to a ghost, someone using his identity, his clearance codes, his authorization signatures. I thought it was identity theft until I found recent photographs and voice recordings. Ma'am, we need to move. Intelligence indicates possible incoming artillery fire. The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency. Rodriguez was loaded onto a medical helicopter, his injuries stabilized but requiring immediate surgical attention. Captain Castellanos secured her intelligence files in a classified transport container. Colonel Webb was restrained and placed under heavy guard. Evelyn, this isn't over. The operation involves people you've never heard of, agencies that don't officially exist. You think you've won, but you've just painted a target on your back. Marcus, I've been dealing with targets on my back for 22 years. It comes with the job. As the helicopters lifted off from the Syrian desert, Evelyn looked back at the concealed facility where the whole operation had begun. Just another patch of sand and stone, indistinguishable from the thousands of square miles of desert surrounding it. But beneath that innocent surface lay evidence of betrayal that reached the highest levels of American government. Major Reeves, what's your assessment of the intelligence gathered? Sergeant, I think we've uncovered the tip of a very large iceberg. The evidence Captain Castellanos gathered suggests this operation has been running for years, involving multiple countries and dozens of personnel. And Colonel Webb. Colonel Webb is either a traitor or he's been coerced into cooperation. Either way, he's facing charges that will end his career and probably his life. The flight back to friendly territory gave Evelyn time to process what had happened. A routine medical evacuation had turned into a major counterintelligence operation. A supposedly dead officer had been revealed as a traitor. Evidence had been gathered that could expose corruption at the highest levels of government. Stitch, what happens now? Now we debrief. We turn over the evidence to proper authorities. We testify before congressional committees. We probably spend the next few years dealing with investigations and court proceedings. And the operation, the weapon sales, the intelligence leaks. With Webb in custody and the evidence we've gathered, the operation is finished. But the damage has already been done. American weapons are already in the hands of hostile groups. Intelligence about our operations has already been compromised. People are going to die because of this. People have already died because of this. Our job now is to make sure it doesn't happen again. The helicopter carrying Rodriguez was already ahead of them, racing toward the nearest military hospital. 22 years of flying together, and it had taken a treason investigation to put him in serious danger. The irony wasn't lost on her. Major Reeves, we're approaching friendly airspace. ETA to base is 15 minutes. The familiar landscape of the American base appeared through the morning haze. Concrete barriers, guard towers, rows of military vehicles arranged in precise formations, the symbols of order and discipline that had defined her entire adult life. But now, those symbols carried a different weight. How many other Marcus Webbs were hidden within the system? How many other operations were running parallel to official military doctrine? Stitch, when you started this investigation, did you suspect it would lead to someone like Webb? I suspected it would lead to someone with high-level access, but I never imagined it would be someone with his reputation. Colonel Webb was considered a hero, decorated veteran, exemplary service record, respected by subordinates and superiors alike. That's what made him so effective. Nobody suspects heroes of being traitors. The base grew larger as they approached, its sprawling complex of buildings and airfields extending to the horizon. Thousands of American military personnel, all sworn to defend the Constitution, all trusting that their leaders shared the same commitment. The thought that some of those leaders might be betraying that trust was almost too painful to contemplate. Major, we're going to be landing in a secure area. Intelligence debriefing will begin immediately upon touchdown. Understood, Sergeant. What about Colonel Webb? He's being transported to a separate facility. Pentagon security will handle his interrogation. Through the cockpit glass, Evelyn could see the secure landing zone. Military police vehicles, intelligence officers, medical personnel. The full apparatus of American military justice preparing to process the evidence they'd gathered. Stitch, are you ready for this? As ready as anyone can be for accusing a decorated colonel of treason. The helicopter touched down with a gentle thud, its engines winding down as ground crew moved to secure the aircraft. But even as they prepared to disembark, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Webb's operation was too sophisticated, too well-funded, too deeply embedded in official channels to be the work of a single individual. Major Reeves, Colonel Harrison is waiting to debrief you personally. Colonel Harrison. She'd heard the name but never met the man. Intelligence officer, career Pentagon staff, the kind of official who dealt with classified operations that never appeared in newspapers or congressional hearings. Sergeant, what's Colonel Harrison's role in this investigation? Ma'am, I'm not cleared for that information, but I understand he's been tracking Colonel Webb's activities for some time. The implication was clear. Webb hadn't just been discovered through a routine audit. He'd been under surveillance, probably for months or years, which meant the Pentagon had suspected his treachery long before Captain Castellanos had stumbled onto the underground facility. Stitch, did you know you were part of a larger investigation? I suspected it. Too many coincidences, too many convenient intelligence leads. I think I was being guided toward specific discoveries. Guided by whom? That's what I intend to find out. The debriefing facility was exactly what Evelyn had expected. Sterile white walls, conference tables, recording equipment. The kind of room where careers were made and destroyed, where classified operations were planned and executed, but also where the truth was supposed to emerge, no matter how painful. Major Reeves, I'm Colonel Harrison. Thank you for your service in this operation. Harrison was younger than she'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of intense focus that came from years of intelligence work. But his eyes carried something else. Exhaustion, maybe, or the weight of carrying classified information for too long. Colonel, I'm not sure I understand what operation you're referring to. We were conducting a medical evacuation that turned into a rescue mission. Major, you were conducting a counterintelligence operation. The medical evacuation was cover for getting Captain Castellanos and her intelligence out of Syria. The words hit like a physical blow. The coordinates that hadn't matched, the evacuation request that had come through unofficial channels, the perfect timing of the rescue helicopter's arrival. None of it had been coincidence. Colonel, are you saying we were used as unwitting participants in a classified operation? I'm saying you were selected as participants because of your reputation for integrity and tactical competence. We needed someone who could extract Captain Castellanos without compromising the investigation. And you didn't think to inform us of the real mission. Major, if you'd known it was a counterintelligence operation, your behavior might have been different. Webb needed to believe he was dealing with a routine rescue mission. The logic was sound but infuriating. They'd been manipulated, used as unwitting assets in a larger operation. Rodriguez had been wounded, their aircraft had been destroyed, they'd nearly been killed, all as part of a Pentagon operation they hadn't even known they were participating in. Colonel, what about the other personnel involved? The mercenaries, the unmarked helicopters? All part of Webb's operation. We've been tracking his network for 2 years, building evidence, identifying participants. Last night was the culmination of that investigation. And if we'd been killed? Major, we had backup plans, but your reputation suggested you'd be able to handle the situation. That assessment proved correct. Captain Castellanos was listening to the conversation with growing anger. Colonel, You're talking about our lives like they were expendable assets. Captain, I'm talking about a treason investigation that could have compromised national security if it had been handled improperly. Sometimes larger considerations require personal sacrifice. Whose sacrifice? You weren't the one trapped underground for 6 hours, or being hunted by mercenaries, or crash landing in the desert. Captain, I've been tracking this operation for 2 years. I've watched American soldiers die because of weapons sold by Marcus Webb. I've seen intelligence compromised that cost lives and missions. Personal risk was acceptable if it meant stopping him. The room fell silent. Through the one-way glass, Evelyn could see other intelligence officers reviewing documents, analyzing evidence, preparing for what would undoubtedly be a complex legal proceeding. Colonel, what happens now? Now we process the evidence. Webb will face court-martial for treason, espionage, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. The mercenaries will be prosecuted under international law. The weapons sales network will be dismantled. And the people who died because of his actions, they'll be remembered as heroes who died defending their country, which is more than they knew at the time. The bitter irony wasn't lost on any of them. American soldiers killed by American weapons, sold by an American colonel, to enemies who'd been systematically informed about American operations. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that it challenged fundamental assumptions about military service and national loyalty. Colonel, how extensive was Webb's network? Extensive enough to operate undetected for 3 years. We've identified contacts in 12 countries, weapons transfers worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and intelligence leaks that compromised dozens of operations. And he was operating alone. That's what we're trying to determine. The evidence suggests he had help from within the Pentagon, possibly from within the intelligence community itself. The implication hung in the air like a threat. If Webb had been operating with inside help, then the investigation was far from over. Other careers would be destroyed, other reputations would be shattered, other lives would be ruined. Stitch, what's your assessment of the evidence you gathered? It's comprehensive. Financial records, weapons manifests, recorded conversations, photographic evidence. Enough to convict Webb and most of his network. But Colonel Harrison is right. The operation was too sophisticated for one person. Meaning we've caught the operational commander, but not necessarily the person giving the orders. Harrison's expression didn't change, but Evelyn caught the subtle shift in his posture, the kind of reaction that came from hearing something he'd hoped wouldn't be said. Captain, that's an interesting theory. Do you have evidence to support it? I have evidence that Webb was reporting to someone with higher clearance than a colonel, authorization codes that required flag officer approval, financial transfers that needed Pentagon-level oversight. And you think that person is still out there? I think that person is probably in this building. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Harrison's face remained neutral, but his hands moved slightly, positioning himself for quick access to his sidearm. The kind of unconscious movement that came from years of training and paranoia. Captain, that's a serious allegation. Are you prepared to support it with evidence? I'm prepared to turn over all evidence to proper authorities and let them reach their own conclusions. I am proper authority. I'm the investigating officer assigned to this case. Colonel, with respect, you're also the person who orchestrated our involvement in this operation, which makes you a potential suspect as well as an investigator. The room erupted in tension. Harrison's hand moved closer to his weapon, while Evelyn shifted position to cover Captain Castellanos. The careful choreography of a potential confrontation played out in a sterile briefing room. Captain, I strongly advise you to reconsider your accusations. Colonel, I strongly advise you to submit to polygraph examination and financial audit. If you're innocent, you have nothing to hide. I don't have to submit to anything. I'm conducting this investigation under direct orders from the Secretary of Defense. Then you won't mind if we verify those orders independently. The standoff continued for several seconds, each participant calculating tactical advantages and potential consequences. But the tension was broken by a knock on the door. Military police, responding to some prearranged signal or simply following standard procedure. Colonel Harrison, General Morrison wants to see you immediately. Harrison's face went pale. General Morrison, the same officer who'd ordered Webb's surrender, the same officer who'd authorized the rescue operation, the same officer who, apparently, had been monitoring the debriefing. Sergeant, tell the general I'll be there as soon as I finish this debriefing. Sir, the general said immediately. He also said to bring all case files and evidence. Harrison's hands trembled slightly as he gathered the documents, the kind of reaction that came from realizing that a carefully constructed plan was collapsing. Major Reeves, Captain Castellanos, you're to remain here until further notice. Don't discuss this case with anyone until you've been properly debriefed. Colonel, are we under arrest? You're under protective custody. There may be other personnel involved in this operation who view you as threats. Personnel like yourself. Harrison stopped at the door, his back rigid with tension. Captain, I've served this country for 22 years. Everything I've done has been in the interest of national security. Colonel, so did Marcus Webb, and look how that turned out. The door closed behind Harrison with a soft click, leaving Evelyn and Captain Castellanos alone in the sterile briefing room. Through the one-way glass, they could see military police taking positions outside, ostensibly for their protection, but obviously to prevent them from leaving. Stitch, what's your assessment of our situation? We're either being protected from Webb's remaining network, or we're being silenced because we know too much. Probably both. And Harrison. Harrison's either an honest investigator who's been compromised by the case, or he's Webb's handler trying to contain the damage. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Multiple personnel, moving with the efficient precision of a planned operation. Through the glass, they could see General Morrison approaching with a full security detail. Major Reeves, Captain Castellanos, I'm General Morrison. I apologize for the confusion, but we've had some developments in the case. Morrison was exactly what Evelyn had expected from a joint Special Operations Command general. Tall, lean, with gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, but also tired, carrying the weight of command decisions that affected thousands of lives. General, what kind of developments? We've arrested Colonel Harrison. Financial investigation revealed he'd been receiving payments from the same accounts used to fund Webb's operation. The words hit like a physical blow. Harrison, the investigating officer, had been part of the conspiracy, which meant the debriefing had been compromised from the beginning. General, how long has Harrison been under suspicion? About 6 months. We've been conducting a parallel investigation, using his case as a way to identify other participants in the network. And you used us as unwitting participants in that investigation too. Major, I used you as competent officers who could be trusted to do the right thing regardless of the circumstances. That assessment proved correct. General, with respect, we've been manipulated by multiple levels of command. We've been lied to, used as assets, and nearly killed in the process. At what point does operational security become simple deception? Morrison's expression didn't change, but Evelyn could see the weight of command decisions in his eyes. The kind of moral compromises that came from dealing with classified operations and national security threats. Major, you're absolutely right. You've been manipulated and deceived. but you've also helped expose a treason network that was directly responsible for American deaths. Sometimes the larger mission requires personal sacrifice. General, whose sacrifice? The soldiers who died because of Webb's weapons sales, the pilots who were shot down by missiles he provided, the intelligence officers who were compromised by information he leaked. All of them, and yours too if necessary. The brutal honesty was refreshing but terrifying. Morrison was acknowledging that their lives were expendable in the larger context of national security. The kind of calculation that military leaders made every day, but rarely admitted openly. General, what happens now? Now we process the evidence and prepare for court-martial proceedings. Webb and Harrison will face charges that will likely result in life sentences. The mercenary network will be dismantled. The weapons sales operation will be shut down. And the people who gave them orders. That's what we're trying to determine. The evidence suggests the network extended beyond Webb and Harrison, possibly into the intelligence community itself. CIA, NSA, DIA. All of the above. The operation was too sophisticated and too well-funded to be the work of two rogue officers. Captain Castellanos was reviewing her intelligence files, cross-referencing names and dates with the new information about Harrison's involvement. General, I think I can help with that identification. How so, Captain? The financial records I gathered show payments to multiple accounts. Some of those accounts are linked to personnel currently assigned to Pentagon staff positions. Active duty personnel. Active duty personnel with access to classified weapons programs and intelligence operations. The implications were staggering. A treason network that extended into the highest levels of American military and intelligence communities. The kind of conspiracy that could compromise national security for decades. Captain, how many personnel are we talking about? Based on the financial evidence, at least 12 individuals. Possibly more if there are participants who weren't directly compensated. And you have evidence linking them to the weapons sales. I have evidence linking them to the same financial networks used to fund the operation. Whether they were knowing participants or unwitting assets would require further investigation. Morrison was silent for several moments, processing the implications of what they'd uncovered. A conspiracy of this magnitude would require congressional hearings, FBI investigations, and possibly criminal prosecutions that would dominate headlines for years. General, there's something else you need to know. Captain Castellanos' voice was quiet but determined. The weapons sales weren't random. They were specifically designed to prolong conflicts in the Middle East. Explain. The weapons were sold to opposing factions in the same conflicts. Webb's network was arming both sides, ensuring that fighting would continue indefinitely. To what end? To justify continued American military involvement, to maintain defense spending, to keep the military-industrial complex profitable. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Not just treason, but a conspiracy to manipulate American foreign policy for profit. The kind of betrayal that struck at the heart of democratic government and military service. Captain, that's a serious allegation. Are you prepared to support it with evidence? I'm prepared to turn over financial records showing payments to defense contractors, intelligence indicating coordinated weapons sales to opposing factions, and recorded conversations discussing the strategic benefits of prolonged conflict. And you gathered this evidence during your investigation. I gathered this evidence during 6 months of following financial trails that led from missing weapons shipments to the highest levels of American government. Morrison's expression was grim. Captain, you've uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that goes far beyond simple weapons sales. This is systematic manipulation of American foreign policy. General, I've uncovered evidence of treason at the highest levels of government. The question is whether anyone has the authority and courage to act on it. Captain, I have the authority. The question is whether the evidence is strong enough to survive the political and legal challenges that will inevitably follow. General, the evidence is overwhelming. The question is whether the system is strong enough to prosecute its own leaders. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of additional personnel. FBI agents, congressional staff, Justice Department prosecutors. The full apparatus of American legal system, preparing to process evidence that could bring down careers and destroy reputations. Major Reeves, Captain Castellanos, you're going to be debriefed by multiple agencies over the next several weeks. Your testimony will be crucial to the success of these prosecutions. General, what about our safety? If this conspiracy extends as far as Captain Castellanos suggests, we could be targets for elimination. You'll be placed in protective custody until the investigations are complete. Federal marshals will provide security, and your identities will be classified until trial proceedings begin. And our families, they'll be protected as well. This is a matter of national security. The weight of what they'd uncovered was finally sinking in. A conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government, evidence that could destroy careers and trigger congressional investigations, testimony that would be scrutinized by the most skilled defense attorneys in the country. General, there's one more thing. Evelyn's voice was quiet but determined. Rodriguez, my co-pilot, he was wounded during this operation. I want to make sure he receives proper medical care and compensation. Major, Captain Rodriguez is receiving the best medical care available. His injuries are serious but not life-threatening. He'll be eligible for full disability compensation and medical retirement if necessary. And recognition for his service. All three of you will receive appropriate recognition once the security classification is lifted. Congressional Medal of Honor is being considered. The irony wasn't lost on her. Recognition for exposing treason, awarded by the same government that had harbored traitors. The same system that had allowed Webb's network to operate undetected for years. General, I have one final question. How do we know this investigation isn't being manipulated by another level of conspiracy? How do we know we're not still being used as unwitting assets? Morrison's smile was grim but genuine. Major, we don't. The nature of intelligence work is that you never know for certain who you can trust, but sometimes you have to act on the best information available and hope you're making the right choice. And if we're wrong, then we've just exposed innocent people to prosecution and destroyed careers unnecessarily. But if we're right, we've prevented a conspiracy that could have compromised American national security for decades. General, those are pretty high stakes. Major, they're the highest stakes possible. The integrity of American government and military service. The debriefing continued for hours, with Captain Castellanos providing detailed testimony about her investigation and the evidence she'd gathered. Financial records, weapons manifests, recorded conversations, photographic evidence. The kind of comprehensive documentation that prosecutors dreamed of having. But as the day progressed, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something. The conspiracy was too neat, too well documented, too easily exposed. Webb and Harrison had been careless, almost deliberately so, as if they'd wanted to be caught. Stitch, does any of this feel strange to you? Strange how? Too convenient, too well documented, too easily discovered. You think we're being set up. I think we're being used. The question is by whom and for what purpose? The question would haunt her for weeks to come, as congressional hearings began and criminal prosecutions moved forward. Webb and Harrison were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. The mercenary network was dismantled. The weapons sales operation was shut down. But the larger questions remained unanswered. Who had given Webb his orders? Who had provided the funding for such an extensive operation? Who had the authority to manipulate American foreign policy at such a fundamental level? The answers, if they existed, were buried in classified files and sealed testimonies, the kind of secrets that governments kept from their own citizens, justified by national security and operational necessity. Years later, when the security classifications were finally lifted and the full scope of the conspiracy became public knowledge, Evelyn would realize that they'd been participants in something far larger than a simple treason investigation. They'd been unwitting assets in a power struggle within the highest levels of American government. But that night, as she sat in a secure facility under federal protection, she was simply a helicopter pilot who'd stumbled onto evidence of treason and lived to tell about it. The woman who'd been mocked as Nightingale had become the officer who'd exposed the biggest military conspiracy in American history. The sky outside her window was clear and star-filled, the same sky she'd flown under for 22 years. But now it carried different meanings. Not just the realm of flight and freedom, but the vast uncertainty of a world where loyalty and betrayal, truth and deception, were separated by the thinnest of margins. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more questions, more evidence of betrayal at the highest levels. But tonight, she was simply a pilot who'd done her job and lived to tell about it. In the end, that was all any of them could do.